What's going on? Alex here, and today I'm answering your tax questions from Reddit. And today's question has to do with whether all tax relief or resolution companies are scams. Let's take a look. All right, so this question comes from Technical Gas 4452 and goes as follows. Is there tax relief help? Like I hear these radio ads all the time. Besides getting on a payment plan, are there any legit law firms that can help with tax relief? A few years of 1099 pay and just wasn't prepared for all the bills. Thanks. All right, so in addressing this question, a bit of a backstory. Now, when I was a kid, I remember these television commercials would come on all the time offering tax relief. And at that point, I didn't really understand what the IRS was, but these ads were promising to fight the IRS, to lower your balance, to settle your tax debt for pennies on the dollar. That was literally the line that every single one of these ads had. That's a quote. And over time, they just became ingrained in my mind. And I started to think that if you ever owe the IRS, whatever this IRS happens to be, you can fight them and not have to pay anything. That's the impression that these ads put forth. And over time, I started as an accountant, then I got into taxes and all that. And at some point, I started studying for the enrolled agent or EA exam, which is a tax-based exam on federal taxation. And at that point, I worked through this entire book, okay? 800 pages. And I thought back to all of these tax resolution, tax relief companies and the ads that they put out and the promises that they made. And I couldn't piece together how they were able to eliminate all of this tax liability seemingly magically. And even as an enrolled agent, it just didn't click in that, wait a minute, I went through this whole book and I didn't really identify any magical ways to get rid of tax debt. I mean, there are installment plans, there's offers and compromise, but there are requirements and parameters that you have to meet for each one of those. It's not just that you owe the IRS $300,000, you make a phone call to a tax relief company and magically it goes away. It's not that straightforward. There has to be some insolvency or doubt as to collectability, all this technical stuff. And it's not just a matter of getting somebody to fight the IRS for you. So I thought, let me find out what happened to all these tax resolution companies because they have to be legitimate, right? They have television ads, they have radio ads. How can they not be legitimate? Well, my research took me back to Ronnie Deutsch. And this is a face that we saw on television in the late 90s, early 2000s quite frequently. It's a bit of a scary thumbnail, pardon me, but this is what came on television pretty much every 5 minutes. And its promises included fighting the IRS, settling your tax debt pennies on the dollar, all of this and all of that. And you can see they're devoted the last 15 years to fighting the IRS. So these really aggressive in-your-face commercials, and that's Ronnie Deutsch. They are the owner of that firm. Then we also saw plenty of this guy on television, right? This was Tax Masters. We solve your tax problems. Former IRS agents are here to take your case. And here's another screenshot, blurry, but more complete. And it was on television constantly. So I really had the impression that these guys were making magic happen. But then I looked at more recent research and I found out why indeed it didn't make any sense to me when I went through the enrolled agent exam materials. So this is Ronnie Deutsch. And skipping all the nonsense, we get down to controversy. So the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs brought a lawsuit charging Deutsch with misleading advertisements that allegedly fail to include key eligibility requirements in order to resolve back taxes with the Internal Revenue Service under its Offer and Compromise program. The Offer and Compromise program enables taxpayers to resolve debts by entering into agreement with the IRS for reduced payments in which a majority of people, here's the key point, do not qualify, okay? So in very simple terms, what these companies would do is they would create the impression that they could solve any tax problem. So you as a desperate taxpayer who, let's say, owes $100,000 to the IRS for whatever reason, you call them up and frequently they'd want you to make a large upfront payment of, let's say, $5,000 or $10,000, what have you. And you're desperate. You're holding this IRS notice that says you got to pay in 30 days. So you pay them that $5,000 and often they'll just come back to you after a number of months, say, oh, well, you don't qualify. Sorry. Whoa. So now you're out the $5,000 that you paid them. Your $100,000 balance has now grown to maybe $110,000, $120,000, depending on how much time has passed. And nothing has changed. It's only gotten worse. And what's even worse on top of that is if you had a legitimate tax professional helping you throughout this time, you would have been handling this problem much sooner and not have it compound into an even bigger issue. But that's basically the structure of the scam in many cases, in that they say, oh, there's this program we can get you into and reduce your debt to pennies on the dollar, knowing full well that 90-something% of the clients that they took on and charged for the service would not qualify. All right. So at the end of it, these clients, or victims, you should say, would end up worse off than when they started. But go ahead and try getting your money back. It's not easy. So majority of people don't qualify. That's the key point. A fact allegedly not evident in the Deutsch advertisement. In 2006, she agreed to pay $300,000 to settle a lawsuit, blah, blah, blah. Then there was a $34 million lawsuit for allegedly orchestrating a heartless scheme that swindled thousands of people facing serious and expensive tax collection problems with the IRS. So essentially, what it led to was the firm being shut down, and I believe she was disbarred. Let's see here. Yeah, so July 27, 2017, Deutsch was disbarred by the California State and default proceeding. All right, so then it kind of made sense why I could not understand the ways in which they were reducing this tax liability, because a lot of it was basically amounting to a scam and nothing else. Okay. All right, so that's Ronnie Deutsch. But I thought, what about the tax masters guy? I mean, he's got a nice beard. This guy has to be legitimate, right? I mean, a good beard, you get my trust automatically. Well, let's look at tax masters. Tax masters Patrick Cox, that's the guy we saw with the majestic beard, hit with nearly $200 million judgment. And here it says a Texas jury has found that a well-known and controversial tax advisory firm, Tax Masters, along with its bearded co-founder, Patrick Cox, used deceptive practices in its bid to lure customers and has hit the company with a staggering $195 million in civil penalties. In a unanimous decision, jurors found that Tax Masters, its holding company TMIRS, and Cox had violated the state's Deceptive Trade Practices Act more than 100,000 times by misleading consumers in television ads and sales calls about upfront costs and confusing them about the services offered. Okay, so you can read the rest of the article here on ABC if you'd like. It's fairly informative. And what eventually ended up happening is that Tax Masters declared bankruptcy, and now they no longer exist, to my understanding. And then there's also an amazing YouTube video about this company on ABC News's YouTube channel. So feel free to check this out. The subject is Tax Masters Racket, and it goes into detail as how this scam unfolds and how people can fall victim to it. Now, what I want to make very clear, having said all that, is that there are legitimate tax resolution and tax relief firms out there. It's not all a scam, okay? But you have to be realistic in terms of what they're offering and the expectations. Because I'll tell you right now, if they're just a tax resolution firm and they don't have a CPA associated with it, they don't have an enrolled agent associated with it, and you can't really make out the credentials of anybody who's there, be very cautious, because it's not necessarily that they're a scam. It's not necessarily that they're going to take your money, not do anything. But I would say the chances are less of that happening if you're dealing with a CPA firm that specializes in tax resolution. If nothing else, because CPAs are generally held to a higher standard. Now, don't get me wrong, CPA can still scam and take your money, all right? But I would say that the chances of that happening are less than if you're dealing with just some fly-by-night operation that just set up shop out of nowhere and they have no real tax credentials to speak of, okay? And keep in mind, the upfront payment is not necessarily indicative of a scam either, because if someone hasn't filed taxes for the last 6 years, they owe the IRS $300,000, I don't think they're going to be too excited about the invoice that they're going to receive when all of this is said and done. If they're not scared of Uncle Sam, they're not scared of my little invoice. So as someone who offers tax relief and tax resolution, I don't want to be on the hook chasing the person when they're worried about paying off their tax debt or whatever amount that ends up being, and have to worry about collection. So I also, in many resolution cases in my practice, expect upfront payment before we move forward. So that's not necessarily indicative of a scam or not a scam, because these cases often take a lot of work, a lot of follow through. They may take a good amount of time, meaning, months or years to resolve in some cases. And in that case, you have to be compensated accordingly. Again, if someone has $300,000 in back taxes, they're not going to be scared of my invoice. Upfront payment is generally required. So that's not an indication in and of itself that there is an issue. But if someone is promising to lower your tax debt seemingly magically and you're not insolvent and there's a chance that you're going to be able to pay now or in the future, or if you have a substantial amount of assets, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to qualify for a lot of these relief programs. And the IRS actually went so far as to create an OIC tool. And if you go right on the pre-qualifier tool here, you can assess whether you qualify for an offer in compromise. So you don't even need to reach out to a lot of these firms in many cases. You can make an assessment right here on the site and ask some pretty basic questions. But as you go through the different sections here, you have status, basic info, assets, income, expenses. It'll tell you, hey, you don't qualify. So if a firm is promising you to put you through the offer in compromise program and lower your taxes, do yourself a favor. Just Google OIC, qualification, IRS, and then it'll take you right to the offer in compromise pre-qualifier. Answer the questions. Go through it and see if you qualify. You're not under any obligation here. It's anonymous. You're not putting in your real info. So this tool was put in place to help taxpayers assess whether they qualify for any of these relief programs without having to go to one of these potentially scam operations and lose a bunch of money at the same time. So the point is that there are methods to resolve tax issues. Sometimes it is for pennies on the dollar, but in a lot of cases, that's not the turnout because the IRS just doesn't want to take $10 when they can have $300,000, all right? In that case, nobody would pay taxes. They would just settle their debt for pennies on the dollar. So there are requirements, there are parameters to allow for offer and compromises to go through and be approved. In some cases they are, but in the vast majority of cases, as it mentions in the article, you don't have to take my word for it, people do not qualify, okay? So with that, it's good to reach out to a few firms that specialize in this area. I prefer to work with CPAs and EAs. That's my preference. And see what they're going to do and what the upfront costs are. It shouldn't be a mystery as to the process. You say, are you going to consider an installment agreement? Are we going to work on offer and compromise? Are we going to look at currently not collectible status, CNC? All those are options that are available. But at the end of the day, each one has requirements. Each one has parameters and thresholds. There are no freebies. And if you can pay off the debt now or in the foreseeable future, there's very little chance of you getting through with offer and compromise. But again, I'm not ruling anything out. I don't know your particular situation. Get an assessment from a few different professionals. And again, don't get scared off necessarily by an upfront payment. That can be an indication that something is shady, but not necessarily, because a lot of professionals don't want to move forward with a case like this without an upfront payment. Okay. But if you're looking at all of these promises that they're going to settle your tax debt pennies on the dollar, fighting the IRS, and your tax debt magically disappears for no reason, and there's not really a great explanation as to the process, and you're not really clear on what's even happening, that can be an indication that you're dealing with a less than upstanding outfit, all right? And even given all these judgments, given that all these companies were shut down and all this other stuff, these ads still prevail because clearly we have a question about it here in 2021 in October, right? So with that, hopefully this helps shed some light on this world of tax resolution, tax relief. Again, I want to emphasize, it's not all a scam. There are very legitimate, helpful tax resolution companies out there, and look at their reviews as well. Often that's a great indication. If you go on Yelp, Google reviews, all of that good stuff, see what kind of reputation they have. If they have 400 5-star reviews, that may be indicative that they get a bunch of fake reviews, but that also may be an indication that they know what they're doing. And make sure to check those not recommended reviews as well, because generally those are also very informative on Yelp especially. All right. So with that, if you have IRS resolution and relief issues, definitely reach out to CPA firms, EA firms. I specialize in this area as well to help with tax resolution and relief. And often there is a way, if not to eliminate the taxes, there's a way to mitigate it and potentially pause some of the collection actions that would happen, like liens, levies, seizures, and so forth. And at some point, you will have taken care of the issue one way or another, even if it involves paying a substantial portion of that tax liability, which it may not. But you want to assess the options to be realistic. Otherwise, you'll end up in a situation where you and your money are going to be parted very quickly and you may not get any results from it. All right. Hopefully this was helpful. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment down below, like the video, subscribe to the channel. There's going to be more financial planning and tax goodness coming, so stay tuned for that. And as always, hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for watching.